Hello, it's Cried here, with an optimized Beast Claws build that runs both the normal Beast Claw and the Red Bear's Claw, in order for you to be able to deal with multiple scenarios. I just finished the Beast Claws breakdown, so if you want even more specific details on the weapon type, you should definitely check that video out. I will also be providing 2 different stat variations for you to choose from for your own preferences. Since you've already seen the stat point distributions, let us begin with why this build is predominantly strength-based. First of all, the Red Bear's Claw scales best to strength. That is an obvious point, but Heavy Infusion is actually our best choice for the Beast Claw as well. I didn't choose this just to be able to run the Red Bear's Claw in tandem. Let us take a look at why this is the case. First, Heavy Infusion beats Keen Infusion in terms of raw attack. Simple enough. Next, let's compare Heavy to Occult. For 21 points loss in attack rating, we're gaining a whole 39 points in bleed. This is obviously a worth it trade-off, right? Well, not always. The answer is only yes if we're looking at these infusions in a vacuum. The issue with the Occult Infusion is that you can't buff the weapon anymore, and we do want to buff our weapon with Bloodflame Blade. Now, you're going to say, oh, it's just Bloodflame Blade. I've seen that incantation a dozen times already. But this incantation matters more for Beast Claws than you think. Allow me to explain. First of all, Bloodflame Blade applies 40 bleed buildup over 2 seconds, regardless of your arcane. Yes, Bloodflame Blade does not scale to your arcane, since it applies 2 bleed per second every 0.1 seconds for 2 seconds. Let's say we straight up add 40 bleed buildup to the Heavy Infusion. Heavy Infusion will now have more bleed buildup than Occult Infusion, and also more attack rating, even if we ignore the little bits of extra attack we'll be getting from the incantation. But this is not the entire story. Taking a look at the motion values for status effect, we see that motion values are at most 100, and usually less because of multi-hits. For a motion value of 100 on an Occult Infusion, we would be applying 100% of your base bleed, which is 84. How about on a 65 motion value? We have 84 multiplied by 0.65, which is 54 bleed. Easy enough to understand. Now, let's apply it to an example we care about. The Occult Infusion is multiplied by a motion value of 60, which would result in 50 bleed buildup. On the other hand, Heavy Infusion with 45 bleed multiplied by 0.6 plus 40 flat bleed buildup will result in 67 bleed buildup. So where did I get this 60 motion value? It's from Savage Claws, our Ash of War choice for this build. Savage Claw does a total of 6 hits, and each hit of the attack only applies 60% of the bleed buildup your weapon has. Therefore, an Occult Infusion can't make use of its full power, whereas Bloodflame Blade applies the bleed dot per hit, and the bleed buildup stacks rather than getting refreshed after each hit. The weapon buff envy on the right does not reduce bleed buildup of weapon buffs. It only reduces the damage portion of Bloodflame Blade, which is negligible for us already. This is why Bloodflame Blade is so effective on Beast Claws. Savage Claws is able to hit multiple times in quick succession and is unique to Beast Claws. While this weapon art does take some time to finish the full animation, you are able to dodge cancel it after the 4th hit if you need to dodge out of a tricky situation. Other than being able to continuously stunlock some enemy types, it also has good numbers all around on its other aspects. Heavy Infusion already deals more damage with the 485% damage portion of Savage Claws, thanks to having higher attack. As for the status damage, Occult Infusion would do 300 bleed buildup, while our Bloodflame Blade Heavy Infused Claws would do 402 bleed buildup. This is a whole 34% more bleed buildup. With this amount of bleed buildup, we are able to easily deal with enemies that are weak to bleed. And for those that are not weak to bleed, we have the Red Bear's Claw. Its weapon art, Red Bear Hunt, actually takes slightly less time than Savage Claws to complete, and this is including the 2 follow-ups. Plus, it also deals more raw physical damage and poise damage. This comes at the cost of dealing only less than half of the bleed buildup our Savage Claw does, as 400% status buildup on this weapon translates to only 180 bleed buildup. Pick the right weapon for the right enemy. I usually like to use Savage Claw to perma-stun enemies that get flinched by the weapon art during exploration. I also start most boss fights with a Bloodflame Blade buffed Beast Claw, but I do switch to Red Bear's Claw for the bosses that are strong against bleed or after Bloodflame Blade expires. Also, it is just worth it to swap to Red Bear Claws to close off fights because of the way resistances work. In Elden Ring, after you apply a status effect to a PvE enemy once, they become more resistant to it. For example, these are Godfrey's resistance values on the wiki. Since it becomes increasingly more difficult to apply bleed to an enemy, swapping to pure DPS using the Red Bear's Claw makes it very efficient for finishing off enemies and not being overly reliant on bleed. As for the 2 stat distributions, the left stat distribution is the simple style, for people who don't want to bother with too many buffs. All you need to carry around is Bloodflame Blade and Bestial Vitality for some extra HP and just for the theme. The right stat distribution, with 27 Faith and less Strength, still runs the 2 incantations of the Strength build, but also carries around the typical Faith buff like Golden Vow and a Greater Barrier spell. They're just good buffs, but I know people do get tired of popping them all the time, me included. It feels really nice just popping Bloodflame Blade and not having to worry about the other buffs. If you are leveling above level 150 and want to keep incantations to a minimum, I suggest investing into Dexterity and changing your Beast Claw's affinity to Quality when your Dexterity hits 39. This will allow your base attack to go higher. And for the Faith path, you can just keep pumping Faith and add in any other incantations you want for a ranged option. Feel free to pump Dexterity and do the Quality infusion too if you don't want any other incantations. Oh, and of course, add more Mind and Endurance at your own discretion. One thing I do want to point out about Endurance though. My current setup has enough Endurance for you to select most lightweight weapons that grants a passive buff when equipped, which still works on your offhand, even when you're two-handing paired weapons. The ones I'm showing on screen are just a few examples to take advantage of the paired weapon. But if you level past 150 and hit 41 Endurance, you will have enough Endurance to carry the Blasphemous Blade. Its passive effect is the upgraded version of the Serpent God's Curved Sword, and if you are going the Faith path, you also get a powerful ranged weapon art to spam. But that's not really the point. The point is that it looks extremely stylish with the rest of your setup. Now, there is something I have to admit about the next part, armor. I'm sure longtime visitors of my channel know how I optimize builds using numbers and calculations. But for the armor here, what we are optimizing for is the fashion. You see, since we're a bleed build with high bleed buildup, the white mask will benefit us greatly. But does it look as good as the pelt of Ralva? Not even close. Also, the Rakshasa armor has a passive that allows you to deal 2% more damage per piece worn. However, every piece of the Rakshasa armor has less negation on average than other armor sets near its weight. In addition to that, you also take 2% more damage per piece from its passive. Therefore, in terms of damage and negation bonuses, any piece of this armor is a net negative, trading more negation than the bonus damage it is providing. However, this armor just looks too good with the pelt of Ralva to pass up. The problem with the pelt of Ralva is you can't have a cloak on your back. or else the bear pelt doesn't show up. Many armor pieces, even altered to remove the cloak, has some sort of shoulder left over that covers a portion of the pelt. But the Rakshasa armor set is not only red, it also allows you to see the bear pelt in its full glory. The Gaia's gauntlets and greaves pairs well with the rest of the setup, and provides you with over 51 points. For your sacred seal of choice, it honestly doesn't matter that much, but here are your optimized options for low faith. A few points of difference, as such a low faith won't really change your damage output, as Bloodflame Blade only uses 40% of your faith-based incantation scaling. You can even pick a zero weight seal if you want to save a point or even 2 on endurance. For the talismans, Dragon Crest Great Shield and the Shard of Alexander are absolutely crucial for this build. Dragon Crest is one of the best defensive talismans in PvE. With how much weapon art we're spamming, the Shard of Alexander is the best source of damage increase. For the 2 other talismans, the Rotten Winged Sword Insignia and the Godskin Swaddling Cloth both works well with Savage Claws. Before the first cast of Savage Claws even ends, you will have full stack on the Rotten Winged Sword, and 2 casts of Savage Claws with the Godskin Swaddling Cloth can heal you up to thrice if you land all your hits. The Crimson Seed Talisman or its upgraded version in the DLC is a good substitute for Godskin Swaddling Cloth, especially if you prefer using the Red Bear's Claw. Our weapon arts don't use too much FP, so we're heavier on the HP pots, and the Lord of Blood's Exaltation is stronger than the Rotten Wing Talisman, but it is not as consistent when you meet bosses that are resistant to bleed or are outright immune. Swap at your own discretion. Finally, for the Crystal tier, the Opaline Heart tier works great for a build that requires you to get close and trade hits, and the Thorny Crack tier is a very easy way for us to greatly increase our damage. It works similarly to the Rotten Wing Talisman, and stacks multiplicatively with it. Both of the Crystal tiers last for 3 minutes, which is usually more than enough time for you to finish the fight. Like and subscribe for more weapon breakdowns or optimized builds like this one. If you want to support my work, please consider buying my fantasy novel or donating to my Patreon down below. With a book purchase, you can also request a topic from me. Krite, signing out.